Insight, IHS Global Insights come out with a study today about the the 400,000 direct and indirect jobs that are the result of the oil and gas industry today in the Gulf of Mexico, and the scale of that growth and the risk to those if development doesn't go ahead. So those numbers are around, and some of you may have seen them already, but recommend them to you.
I think your point was a loss of 300,000 jobs if the oil moratorium, or if independents are chased from the Gulf through legislation.
Yeah. So according to Global Insight, a loss of 300,000 jobs by 2020 if the independents are not in the deepwater Gulf of, wait, let me say that again. By 2020, a loss of 300,000 jobs, direct and indirect, if the independents are not in the Gulf of Mexico. 265,000 of those jobs would be just if they're not in the deep water. And over a 10-year period, a loss to the federal government just from tax revenues and state governments and local governments, just from the 4 states down there, of something on the order of $150 billion.
Major losses of revenue. Secretary Gutierrez talked about. Go ahead, Secretary.
Sorry. Just to pick up on what Congressman Brady and Dr. Yergin was saying, we think about this as a 6-month stop, and that we're going to switch off the light and then switch it back on. Many companies will simply go away, and they'll put their sites someplace else, and it doesn't take a couple of weeks to do that. That's a long-term process. These are big, complex systems that can't be moved in a matter of days. So our fear is that they're just going to pack up and go away, because they can't have idle equipment sitting around the Gulf for months. And of course, then there's the expectation that if drilling is restored and when it is restored, that it will be a very different regulatory environment. And that will also scare away investors. So it is an example of putting the interest of jobs secondary to another interest that the administration may have.
But Mr. Gutierrez, there are other industries that are fueled by the Gulf of Mexico, and they're losing jobs right now. If another rig, the same thing happened, maybe something, it would be even worse. Those jobs would be gone forever. So wouldn't it be appropriate to just stop for a minute, try to figure out what happened, and then move forward?
Well, that's the way people think about it. Let's stop for a minute. I don't think that's what we're doing. I think when we come out of this, we're going to come out with a lot more regulations. But would you ground all planes if you had one plane crash? That had a great human toll, because plane crashes have great human toll, just like the explosion in the Gulf did. But we don't ground planes. We find ways to make sure that air safety is better. And this could have been an opportunity to really get all of the companies together, as they are doing now, to figure out ways to ensure that we have the technology that this never happens again. But we chose the moratorium route, which affects a lot of people. Over the long term, 300,000. We think that today it could be 40,000 people that are impacted. So no, we don't think that's the wise way to go.
Do you think this accident is going to cause innovation in the deep water drilling sector?
Well, you would hope that is one of the outcomes, that because of this accident, that we invest, companies, even the federal government, if they're into investing, but companies invest to do it safer, to do it more cost efficiently, to do it more effectively. But my concern is that the attitude of the government is scaring off that type of innovation.
2 thoughts. At the end of the day, one, energy industry is incredibly innovative. That's why they have such a huge track record, become so productive, smaller footprints, more accurate drilling, higher success rate. At the end of the day, I can't prejudge. At the end of the day, I believe this will be a case of human error and operator error rather than equipment failure. But I want to make this point. The moratorium is already having a severe and perhaps irreparable, creating severe and irreparable damage to jobs in the Gulf of Mexico. And Congress may next week make it even more damaging with, I think, unrealistic legislation that drives independence out of the Gulf, that creates uncertainty so that energy industries take their dollars and their investment to other countries. And at the end of the day, we're more vulnerable to from an energy security standpoint. So that's why we're raising this issue so strongly. And it's why I've asked the President to come to Houston to meet with energy workers and businesses whose livelihood is at risk because of the moratorium. He's been to every other Gulf state. He's coming to Houston to raise money, campaign money. We've just asked for an hour, even 15 minutes from him, to meet with our energy workers to explain, and so he can hear the damage it's causing. And we've yet to hear back from him, but we hope to.
All right, we're good. Thank you.
Could you talk about what the implications would be if the moratorium were in fact shut off in 6 months or in November?
A lot of the damage will be done if it's allowed to continue through then. And I think that was the point that was made, that even if it comes back up, because of the way this industry works, the rigs have been redeployed, the jobs and capital with them. And they don't come back anytime soon. That's the problem. That was your point.
Yeah, it takes a long time to relocate and restart up. And they're not going to go off for 6 months and then come back.
And I've heard predictions that that as many as a dozen rigs could eventually move away. Did you talk any forecast or numbers?
We didn't. I know from the energy roundtables we had in Houston 2 weeks ago that there was an assumption that many of the rigs, not exact number, would be redeployed elsewhere within the 6 month period and not return between a year to 3 year time period, depending on where they went.
Congressman, you were focusing on the role of the independent companies in your economic analysis, but aren't the independent companies, for the most part, aren't they shallow water drillers, and they wouldn't really be affected by this deep water moratorium?
They're actually partners in many of the other ones as well, but they're also the most vulnerable to the moratorium because they're doing shallow well exploration, and they're not getting timely permits. You're already seeing them struggle. But it's not the moratorium. Dr. Yergin's point was if legislation is passed through Congress that discourages independence, long term you have some very dramatic. Is that right?
Yeah. What when Global Insight did the study, I mean, one of the things that was really a surprise was to find out that about half the activity in the deep water is actually independence. So, and it's a very integrated relationship between majors and independents. So it's not like, because I think it started off sort of thought, well, they're mainly in the, in the shallow. Yeah.
Okay.
So
And
the numbers.
So
are
that's just like a common misperception.
Yeah, I mean, we just had to go into the databases and crunch the numbers, and that's what came out.
And that study seemed to look at the data in view of the liability proposals. Are there other proposals that are of particular concern with regard to independence being forced out of the Gulf?
Liability is one of them, obviously, but also expansions of Jones Act, which would make it very difficult for availability of rigs and equipment in the Gulf as well.
So flagging
Yeah,
and build requirements.
Exactly.
Okay.
Certifications, inspections that require blowout preventers to be pulled out of service could have a huge impact on
Yeah, that they're different. I mean, the point is that there should be some consideration to what are the different ways to meet the liability questions that don't shut down half the industry, and whether there's a mutualization, as people talk about it, of risk, and so there are a lot of proposals that are on the table, and that's what need to to be looked at so you can achieve the objectives you want to achieve without shutting down half the industry.
My sense is the industry, I don't want to take too much of your time, my sense is the industry doesn't quite know what the liability proposal would be that would be ideal, and not one size fits all. Is it achievable?
I think that's right. I mean, I think
You go ahead.
I think it needs to be thrashed out. Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it turns, the more people get into it, the more, turns out it's even more complicated than they thought when they began.
I think if Congress weren't to rush through this, what we you would find is industry, science, and government sitting down to work through the issues in a much more, I think, common sense way, and looking at, rather than picking out of thin air, let's take liability 10 times larger than it is, you'd say, okay, what should it be updated as far as its impact from its original level? Can we allow companies to pool together? You know, 4 or 5 companies pool together to get umbrella coverage where, you know, it's more affordable for all, but the risk, you know, and the desire to hit those standards is still there. There's a lot of good options.
Yeah, and that's, I think, the point is that what's really required here is a government, industry, academic, expert collaboration to work through these problems and to do them in a considered way.
And the goal being, how do we do this better in the future, as opposed to how do we punish these companies?
So you guys are not saying no, absolutely no, to new legislation, you're just saying,
Yeah,
it's
right.
moving too fast.
Yeah, and it's
Don't be hasty.
yeah, and it's you know, there's no going back to the old days. I mean, there has to be a new system. People, the nation, the people who live in the Gulf region need to be confident about and have reason to be confident about the security of the system. I mean, it's remarkable. One of the things, again, came out of the study, we looked into the Department of Interior, between 1970 and this, the total number of barrels that were spilled in the OCS was on an average of 45 barrels a year. I mean, so, you know, the system, until this tragedy, the system worked pretty well.
What was that number again?
Average of 45 barrels a year, according to the Department of Energy data. 1,800 barrels over a 40-year period. That's in the, you know, that May 28th report that the Mineral Management Service put out. There's a table in there that's the source for it.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Which you're all from?
I'm from Bloomberg.
Oh, right.
And I don't know, is your study, is it public at all? Or
Yeah,
is-
I think there's a couple copies there, but
Okay.
it's on IHS. It's a little complicated. IHS Global Insight.
Yes.
You go on their
No,
website.
We're very familiar with
Yeah,
you
yeah.
guys.
It's just so. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Jennifer DeLoe with Hearst Newspapers and the Houston Chronicle. I know you talked to Tom and my
Oh,
colleagues
yeah,
down there quite
yeah.
a bit.